Hello everyone, alright, let's finish this off. This is now going to be where we integrate our choices into the dialog files. So I gave a brief example of what this would look like in our dialog file in the last episode, but here's an example here. So this is a logical line for our choice. So we're going to be looking for this choice keyword, and then the question that's going to be asked is going to be inside of quotes after that. And then all the data for this choice will be separated into individual lines contained within inside of brackets. Each individual choice is going to be identified by a certain symbol, which I have chosen to be the minus symbol. After that minus symbol, we'll have the name of the choice, and we can have as many as we want. And the following lines up until the next choice or up until the end of the choice dialog line will be all of the lines that will be executed if that choice is selected. So when Stella asks the question if we like dogs or cats, and we respond with dogs, then these lines will execute, and then it will skip to the very end and will continue off down here. But if we choose cats or chinchillas or something, we'll run their logic instead. And this can be dialogue and commands. Anything that we can have down here, we can have inside of our choices. All the same stuff. So we need to code this out and make this new logical line. Let's come to Unity into the logical lines and the types where we have the input logical line. Let's make a new C# script and make this LL or logical line for choice. Now, of course, the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be encapsulating this into the namespace of dialog.logical lines, and I'll be removing mono behavior and making this in a part of the iLogicalLine interface. We'll go ahead and remove start and update, and then I will go ahead and implement the interface, and we have the necessary items here. So our keyword is going to be choice. That's what I am deciding to do for this, because it makes the most sense. This is the question we're being asked, so we've got a choice. Now let's go ahead and define those special characters that will tell us where the encapsulators are and what identifies the choices. So we'll do a private string, or actually we'll make this a private constant character because it's only one symbol, and this will be the encapsulation start. That is going to equal this symbol, the starting bracket. We'll duplicate that and make encapsulation end and just make that the ending bracket. And then let's go ahead and make a private constant character to identify the choices. This will be the choice identifier, and that is going to equal that minus symbol that I chose. Okay, cool. Now the logical line manager is automatically going to handle whether a line matches this by looking at this function, matches. So how do we know if the line we're looking at matches this logical line? Well, we need to take a look at since we have quotes, we have a speaker, and we have dialogue. Technically, that's what it thinks. That's what will be in this dialogue line. We'll have a speaker, and we'll have dialogue, where our speaker will be choice, and our dialogue will be what pet do you prefer, or whatever the choice is. So we're going to check this by going ahead and returning something, whether our line.hasSpeaker. If our line has a speaker and the line.speakerdata.name.toLower equals our keyword. If that's true, then we know that this is the choice line. So now we just need to tell it what to do if it actually finds this line. Well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to rip the data from the conversation that's being run right now. We want to go ahead and rip everything and grab all of the lines that we need, including the title and the choices and all of the lines that they contain. And we'll need something to store all this data in. So I'm going to make this something for raw choice data. This will be just the data ripped from the file, and then we'll validate it and look at it afterwards. So down at the bottom, let's go ahead and make a new private struct called raw choice data. Okay, and what we're going to have in here is a public list of strings for lines, and when this choice is made, if we've made one, let me go back to the file. When this choice is made, we know our conversation manager is handling everything one line at a time. So we get here, and if we execute these lines, but we don't change the progress of the conversation manager, it'll pick up here, and then it'll just go through each line after we've made our choice. Or if we make this choice and we finish this line, then it will go ahead and proceed to read through the rest of these. So instead, what we need to do is we need to find the index of the final line here, and then set that as our ending index. So once we make our choice, that's where we'll send our conversation manager to, and it'll pick up from there. So we want a public int for the file end index. Well, that sounds like the end of a file. I'm going to do the ending index. I'm just going to do that. And while we're defining the data types, how about when we actually collect these choices? We need to store them in something as well. So let's make ourselves a private struct for the choice as well. And what we're going to have in our choice is obviously the name of the choice and all of the lines that will execute if it's selected. So let's give ourselves a public string for the choice title, or since it's a struct of choice, we'll just call it title. And we'll also have a public list string for the results lines. We'll make it the result lines. These are lines that are going to be executed if we make this choice. So let's head back to the top here. When we execute this line, we need to go ahead and rip the data. So let's make a function for that, and we'll call it inside of execute. It'll be private. We will return the raw choice data, and we're just going to call it rip choice data. We're going to pull everything we need from the current conversation that's running. So as we execute raw choice data, data equals, we'll go ahead and say rip choice data. Okay, so what do we do when we're ripping it? Well, first of all, we need to get the conversation. We need to know what it is that we're ripping the data from. Now, since our dialog system has a reference to the conversation manager, and the conversation manager has a reference to the conversation that it's running, we can just grab it from that. So let's go ahead and say that conversation, and we'll call it the current conversation, equals the dialog system dot instance dot conversation manager dot conversation. This is the one that is running right now. Okay, so we grab our conversation. Next thing we need to know is we need to know what the current what the progress is of it. So integer, we'll call this the current progress. How far are we? Like, when did we encounter this line? And that'll be our dialog system dot instance dot conversation manager dot. We don't actually have a reference to the progress in there, do we? Let's go ahead and make one real quick. So let's make a reference to that in our conversation manager. Public int progress. I'll actually call that. I'll call that conversation progress. And point that to, let's check if our conversation queue dot is empty. If it's empty, then we're going to return -1. Otherwise, we'll return our conversation queue. Conversation queue. Where's my queue? There we are. Dot top dot get progress. And now I can grab our conversation progress. Okay. Now, another thing we need to be aware of is the encapsulation depth. As we're looking in here, we know that our choice has encapsulation identifiers. So if we're to count the depth of encapsulation, all of this is encapsulated at depth 1. Now, if we were to have another logical line that also uses these, such as like maybe if we have some sort of if statement, yada yada, and then inside of if, we could have that just as an example. But then if we get to this point, now we encounter another encapsulator and, ending there, this should count as encapsulation depth 2. So we can have depths of encapsulation, and we could even have another choice inside of this choice. So we don't want the encapsulators from this choice to affect our overall root choice. We want it to be its own separate thing. So we need to identify the encapsulation level and make sure that we don't stop ripping content at the first encounter of this ending symbol. We need to stop ripping data once we have hit the ending encapsulator of our root encapsulation level 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and define int encapsulation level or depth, and I'm going to assign that to 0 right now. Okay, so now let's make our raw choice data equal new raw choice data, and we're going to populate it with some lines. So lines equals a new list of strings, and since we're doing this, we'll now have a list that we can just start ripping lines into. And we also want the file end index. We don't know what that is yet, so we're going to just set that to 0 right now. But now we can go ahead and loop through all the lines in this conversation until we find the end of this choice. I'll be doing this with a basic for loop, and for every line that we find, let's go ahead and just cache it. So a string line will equal our current conversation, and we're going to get the lines, and we're going to find the one at this index that we're working with. So as we're ripping all this, let's just go ahead and say that data.lines.add the line that we're working with. And let's also figure out if this is an encapsulator or not. So we need a way to verify if what we're looking at matches these symbols, so let's just make a couple quick functions down here. So we'll have one for a private bool is encapsulation start. And this is going to take in a string for the line. What we're going to do is we're going to say line.trim. Since we're using tabs, we want to make sure we remove all of that. And let's just check if it starts with our encapsulation start key. And the same thing is encapsulation end. Let's just check if it is our encapsulation end. And we can do the same thing for our choice. So if is choice start, which would be if it starts with this symbol that identifies a choice. Okay, cool. So back in here, let's go ahead and check. Let's see. If is encapsulation start. And let's verify that against our line. If it is, then we'll say encapsulation depth ++, and we have hit a new level of encapsulation depth. And we'll just continue, no need to do anything else from there. However, if is our encapsulation end, if that's the case, then we want to make sure that in encapsulation depth gets subtracted, and if encapsulation depth equals 0, meaning we have found the last one, and we have found the end of this choice, then we're going to say that data.ending index equals the index that we're on. So now we know where this choice ends within the file, and we're going to break the loop. Once that happens and we're done, let's go ahead and return the data. Now we have all the data. We know where the choice ends, so we can resume from that line in the conversation manager when we're done. So that's good. So we execute this, and we get all that data, but now we need to extract the choices and the title from it, and all the lines that are associated with each individual choice. So we're going to make this a list of our choice struct type, and we'll call this choices. And this will equal the result of a new function we're going to create in a second. We'll just call it get choices from data, and we'll take in that data. So maybe if I control dot, I can generate a method. Okay, here we are. Yep, sure did. So get choices from data, and here's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to put this underneath our rip choice data. Kind of keep things in order. Okay, so how are we going to do this? When we come to get the choices from the data, we need to rip everything into a list of choices. So let's define that. A list of choice, if I can ever spell right. A list of choice for our choices. We will go ahead and cache that. And we need to keep track of our encapsulation depth. So int encapsulation depth equals 0. That way we don't cache the choices of like sub-choices. So these choices are in encapsulation depth 0, which is just inside the first one. But if we have a sub-choice here, which could be executed at time if we choose dogs, then we also have these symbols and we have these choices. So we don't want to go snagging choices that are not actually within our level here. So we only want to get these inside of the encapsulation level that we're working with. Next thing we want is we want to cache our choice. So that way we can start adding data to it. So choice equals new choice. And we're going to go ahead and say that our title will equal just nothing right now because we don't have anything. And our lines will equal a new list of strings. So we can start populating this choice now. So we need to loop through every value inside of our data. So for var line in data.lines, but we need to skip the first one because that's our title, and we don't want that in this calculation. So we're going to skip and just skip the first line. So let's go ahead and check. If is choice start line and encapsulation depth equals 1. If we're inside of the main encapsulator and we find a choice, let's go ahead and log it. But let's only add the choice to our choices list if it is not the first one that we're finding, because we just need to get the title of the choice and then start getting the data. We don't have the data yet, so we can't add it to our list. So let's just check the length. If choices.count is greater than 0, if we've already got choices, then we're going to add the choice that we have already been working with, because at this point we've found a new one. So choices.add choice. And then let's create the cache for the next one. So choice equals new choice. And the title will equal string.empty, and the result lines will equal a new list of strings. Otherwise, and after the fact, we're going to make sure that we go ahead and set our choice.title to equal the line that we're working with, .trim, so let's get rid of the white space, and let's also get rid of that identifier at the very beginning. What that means is as we start this, we have entered encapsulation level 1 and we have now encountered a choice. But since we don't already have choices in the array, we know we're just starting out, so we're not going to add an empty choice to the list. Instead, we're going to build a new one and we're going to assign the title to dogs, and now we're ready to collect the data. So we know we're done with this line, so let's continue. Okay, so if that's not the case, if we have not found a choice, then this is just some other line that needs to be executed, or it's an encapsulator. So we need to identify what that is. So let's go ahead and make another function, a private void called add line to results. And we need to take in some data here. We need to know what line it is we're working with. So we'll take a string for our line so we can look at it. We want a reference to our choice. That way we can add the line to it if it passes inspection. And we also need a reference to our encapsulation level so we can know where we are and we can change it if we have found a new encapsulated start or end point. So ref int encapsulation depth. And if we are not on a choice line, then let's go ahead and add line to results, and let's pass in the line, and let's pass in the choice that we're working with, and let's also pass in the encapsulation depth. Make sure you're using the reference keyword because we need this to be something that can be edited from inside of here, not just passed in the value, but passed in the actual variable itself. That's what reference does. Okay, so we're giving it the memory space that it can change. All right, so first thing let's do is let's say line.trim. Let's get rid of all that white space and just look at the data. Now, if is encapsulation start, if this is the encapsulation start point, then let's go ahead and say that encapsulation depth plus plus, and let's return. And we're not going to add anything in here. But we do want to add the encapsulation identifiers if they are of a different depth. So such as sub-encapsulators. We want to make sure we include those because they're going to be needed if we actually get to those lines in the future, such as that encapsulated choice that we have within this choice we're looking at. So let's just check the level. If encapsulation depth is greater than 0, we know that this is not the first encapsulator, so we are not to ignore it. What we need to do is say choice.resultLines.add line. Okay, and we also need to check if we have reached an encapsulation endpoint. So if is encapsulation end, so if we found the ending encapsulation identifier, maybe it's ours, maybe it's not. Let's go ahead and say encapsulation depth minus, and now let's look. Let's look and see what level we're on. If encapsulation depth is greater than 0, we know we've not reached the end. So this is a sub-encapsulator that just got closed. So let's go ahead and add that, and continue, because we're done. Or return, not continue. We're not in a loop here. Okay, lastly, we need to add our other lines. So let's go ahead and say that choice.resultLines.add, and we're going to add the line. If it's anything else, we can just go ahead and add it. And there we go. We'll gather all the information we need this way. So once we've finished with that and we've hit the end of our loop, let's go ahead and return the choices. So let's head back to the top. Now we've got all the data that we need for this choice. So we grab our choices and we're ready to work with them. The first thing we need to get is we need to get our title, so that way we know what we need to put onto the choice panel. So string title equals line.dialogData.raw data. Because the title is going to be counted as the dialog in this line. In the same way that we used the supposed speaker to identify that this is a choice, the dialog identifies the title of our choice. And now let's go ahead and grab our choice panel. So our choice panel panel equals our choice panel dot instance. So we're going to grab the one in the scene, and then we just need to convert our choice titles into an array. So we're going to look at all of our choices, grab their titles, and then send that to our choice panel. So let's cache it into an array for the choice titles. This is what needs to show up on screen. So equals choices. Let's go ahead and select everything inside of this array. Let's get the choices as C, and then we're going to grab C.title. So for every title, we're going to grab all of them and convert it into an array. And now we're ready. So we can say panel.show, and we're going to show the title and the choice titles. So our panel shows up. And now let's just wait for input. Let's wait for a choice to be made. So while panel.is waiting on user choice, we're going to yield, come on, yield return null. There. Oh, I before E. Yeah, that grammar rule. That's important. So there we are. We're waiting on that choice, and once the choice is made, then we should be able to find out what choice was made by grabbing the answer index from our panel. So we can say choice selected choice from our array will just equal something from our array at the index of our panel dot last decision dot answer index. Okay, so here's where we make use of that system that we built in the last episode. Now we have our choice, and we have all the lines that are associated to it. So all of these lines we need to implement as a new conversation that is run on top of our current conversation. It takes precedence and it will be executed, and once that finishes, then we'll continue off and we'll assign the progress of our initial conversation to be the ending index of this choice. Man, this is a lot of words. There's a lot of stuff that's going on here, but I hope I'm making this clear. I know we got some very intelligent people in the chat, so I have a feeling y'all can follow along pretty well. But I also know there are some beginners out there, so if you're kind of getting lost here, just roll with it. Just roll, and if you have questions, ask away. But let's go ahead and say conversation. Let's build a new conversation that our conversation manager is going to handle. So this will be our new conversation, and we're going to set that equal to a new conversation type, taking in our selected choice result lines. So now we have the new conversation that we need to run. But let's go ahead and set the index of our current conversation, the one that triggered this choice, to be the ending index. That way, once we finish with this new conversation, it'll pick up where it needs to, and we won't run the risk of reading into the other choices. But we'll continue at the very end. So let's go ahead and get our dialog system dot instance dot conversation manager dot conversation dot set progress, and we're going to set the progress to our data dot file, our data dot ending index. So once it continues, it'll pick up at the very last line, taking us past this choice. And now we just need to start this new conversation. So dialog system dot instance dot conversation manager dot enqueue priority, and we're going to set the new conversation as the new priority. And that's it. That's our choice panel. This should be working, so let's go ahead and try it. So I've got rid of the sub choice for right now. We'll add that back in a second, but let's just test it out with these main choices. In testing, let's make sure that test dialog with a chapter file is ready, and let's launch. Okay, so right off the bat, we get Stella coming up. She asks the question, and then we get, what pet do you prefer? But as you can see, the choices are not coming up, which means I actually missed something. If I run the Visual Studio debugger, I can see that my choices count is 0, so it's actually not grabbing them. But if I look at the data, we can see that it does have all of the lines here. And I see exactly what is wrong. We are never going to be adding any choices if we're waiting for the choice count to be greater than 0 when it starts out at 0. Yeah, I don't know what I was doing there, but let's go ahead and just stop that. Actually, looking at count might not be the best way. So let's just add ourselves a Boolean and to tell whether this is the first choice or not. Because if it's the first choice, that's the only one that we need to skip until we have the right data on it. So we'll set that to true, and as long as this is not the first choice, then we'll go ahead and add it immediately. And we'll say is first choice equals false. So that way, first choice, we'll go ahead and gather the data, and once we encounter the second one, then we'll add the first choice because it's finished. But that just means that for our final line, after we have exited here, it's actually not going to come back to this loop to get our final choice, so we need to add our final choice out here. So let's look if not choices dot contains our current choice that we're working with, then choices dot add choice. Okay, there we go. Let's try this one more time. Okay, Stella comes up. You like dogs or cats? Here we go. Dogs, cats, and I prefer chinchillas. So we've got both of our options here. I'm going to go with dogs. And there we are. Dogs are wonderful. They give you so much undeserved love. And I can't click the screen because I don't think my choice panel disabled the interactability state. But if I just hit the space key, then there we are. We proceed, and we are talking about dialogue. And we end it, and there we are. We have skipped to the line that is after the choice. So here's what we did. We looked at that choice, and then we executed these lines, and then we moved to the ending index, which took us right to this line at the very end. Now let's add ourselves well, actually, before I forget, let me go into the choice panel and just make sure that when we hide the choice panel, we also say cg.setInteractableState to false. That way I can click the screen again. But now let's go ahead and add a fourth choice and say arachnids. And let me go ahead and make her ask a question like why. So let's add that new choice in for arachnids. And now Stella's going to comment, and then we'll have ourselves another choice inside of this choice. And then we'll have some lines that will continue after this choice. So we've got multi-level encapsulation here, and we should have multiple stacks in our queue system for our conversation manager. So if all this works correctly, we should be able to choose arachnids, make a choice here, and then we'll finish these lines, and then we'll proceed on to the rest of the conversation. So let's start it up. Okay, Stella comes in. You like dogs or cats? All right, arachnids. Let's choose that. Ew, why spiders? And here we are, our second choice. So now we can choose one of these. Okay, so they're cool. Well, we can be friends as long as you keep them away from me. There we go. We are proceeding, and there you go. Say what you will, I like them. So that is actually outside of the first choice. So it's back to the second conversation, and then here we go, and now we're back to the main conversation. So our enqueuement system is working directly with our choices, and we've got that completely integrated into our dialogue files now. So there we go, that completes our choice system. In the next episode, we're going to look at how we can progress this further and start loading new dialogue files. And by loading new dialogue files from choices, we can actually start creating branching paths in our stories. So that's what we're going to be working on in the next episode. I'll see you guys then. Have a good week.